Why do some teams struggle to be relevant while the Packers seem to have this whole thing figured out? The key is understanding when you are ready to compete.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. For those of you who can't see me, I am currently away traveling with family. Experiencing warmer weather somewhere. So we're doing our best here to make sure that you're still getting what you need as part of the Locked On Packers community. We are in the offseason, but there's still so much to get to because every day something new happens that makes you go, oh, the NFL is like that. And today, there are two big things that made me do that and think about it relative to the Packers. And one is the crazy market that has been out there for guards and interior offensive linemen. We're not going to talk about that right now. We'll get there. I know that's the sexiest topic I could have possibly mentioned. But the other is the Titans made this big swing for L'Jarius Sneed. They send a third-round pick plus a pick swap to the Chiefs for L'Jarius Sneed and pay him near the top of the market. And that made me go, why? Why did they do that? Why did they go and pay top dollar for Calvin Ridley? Why is a team that has no shot to win the AFC handling it like this? They're after all of this spending and all of the resources that they've allocated toward this season, they're not even the favorite to win their own division. Yet they're paying a top of market contract to a defensive tackle, a top of market contract to a corner, and a top of market contract to a receiver. There's maximizing the window of your rookie QB contract, and then there's spending recklessly just because you have the cap space. And it seems like the Titans have leaned toward the latter. Now, rewind a year ago this time. The Aaron Rodgers trade, Jordan Love, getting younger. Now, we didn't see yet the draft picks that they would make. We didn't see how good they would become, which is another crucial part of this. That Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed and Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave turn into like legitimate good rotation players at the very least right away is an enormous part of the success that this team had last year. But you will never convince me, and everydayers, people who have been with this show for more than a year, or at least a year, will remember that back in August and July, I was arguing with anyone who wanted to tell you the Packers were rebuilding. I do not believe that the Packers, as of the draft even, as soon as they made the Aaron Rodgers trade, but I think especially post-draft, once they got out of the draft with the guys that they left with, the offensive playmaking that they found, they did not believe they would be worse than they were in 2022. They just didn't. And whether you believed it is irrelevant. They didn't. And they went into the season going, yes, it is aesthetically, in some ways, if you exclude all the context, similar to what other teams would call a rebuild. You're moving on from a Hall of Fame quarterback and you're moving on from veteran players. But the Packers believed going from Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb to Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks would be an upgrade. They believed that going from Mercedes Lewis and Robert Tonyan to Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave would be an upgrade. And potentially right away. So, but they handled it the way that they did. Now, that's not to say that this was perfect, because you will never, ever, ever convince me that if the Packers had a crystal ball and saw in the second half of the season Jordan Love would play like an MVP candidate, that Dontavian Wicks and Tucker Kraft would seamlessly move into the Luke Musgrave role and be terrific, that Jaden Reed would ascend to like stardom level player, that Carl Brooks would be what he was, and all of those, that they would make do with Carrington Valentine and Corey Ballantyne and get into the postseason, not just get into the postseason, but blow out the Cowboys and then beat the 49ers, or nearly beat the 49ers, excuse me. You will never convince me that if they knew all of that, they would have traded Russell Douglas. They misjudged their own trajectory. Now, hopefully, it doesn't hurt them long term. But when you think about this team and where they are now, what is their biggest need, really? It's corner. Or one of them. And so if that's the case, you traded a player on a good contract who was still a good player, and the Bills would pay Russell Douglas right now today double what he's making. Double. So the idea that, they had to get off this money. Like the L'Jarius Sneed, I understand the Chiefs don't want to pay that guy. But that's not what was happening. And this is not to relitigate all of that. It is to say that the Packers now seem to have a firm grasp. They understood then that year one of this reset, this retool, this reallocation, not a rebuild, reallocation would involve some hiccups. Those hiccups were a little middle of the losing streak. We all remember what it was like in October and early November to follow the Packers. It was weird. It was difficult. It did not look great. But the Packers misunderstood where they were. Going out and signing a safety at the top of the market, a running back near the top of the market, and spending money or draft resources on the interior offensive line. Those would not be things that I would like for a rebuilding team, a team like the Titans or a team like the Bears, who went out and paid money for a safety and paid money for a running back. It's like, that's not the position that you're in. That's not what you do. So why are you doing that? That doesn't make sense for you. But it makes sense for the Packers because the Packers are now in a window where they can win in a real way. And they seem to understand that. It's why you go out and you pay Xavier McKinney. It's why you can do the Josh Jacobs swap. And it's why they can use first-round draft capital if they want to on an interior offensive lineman. I want to talk more about that piece because a lot of Packer fans are up in arms about that. But the market, what is going on in the NFL right now, says it's not a bad idea. I'm going to explain in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game. Is your bracket already toast? Do you have your final teams already out? Are they already gone? They might be. A lot of you lost with Kentucky. A lot of you lost with Kentucky. And I understand. That's the whole fun of this thing. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, you should be betting on the dance at America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick a future bet. Who's going to win them all? Hopefully you did that a week or two ago. Your odds are probably shifting a little bit now, and that's okay. You can still get in on the action. There's still a lot of fun to be had in the futures market right now. Those teams are dwindling down. So now maybe you got a better idea. You feel a little bit more comfortable. Now's the time to move on it. Certainly now the time, the closer we get, the closer it means you should just probably bet them game by game, which is fine too. Because you can do that. That's the fun of it on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So when you are a truly contending team, your priorities can shift in ways that they can't when you're not, okay? So when you are a team that is one or two players away, when you are a safety away, it's a different risk proposition for you precisely because the reward is different. Making yourself a complete team is more valuable than adding at a premium position elsewhere. There's also this changing market. And so it had been the case for a long time that interior offensive linemen they'd gone the way of running backs. You just didn't have to pay them because you could always just find them and it was less important. Well, now these interior pass rushers, and I think the rise of Aaron Donald contributed to this as well. We saw, this happens a lot, a little side tangent, but when a truly elite, unique player comes into the game and dominates, all these teams go, well, we want that guy. The problem is there's only one. But we do have more guys now who are wrecking the game as interior pass rushers, like they did in the 90s. We had Warren Sapp and John Randall and all these dudes who could just absolutely eat up a game. Cortez Kennedy, that dominated games. Then there's this cycle, and now we're back there. And part of the reason that we're back there is because all these too high safety coverages, if you can get interior pressure, the middle of the field is where teams are going to want to throw. And if you can get interior pressure, it makes it much more difficult to throw to the middle of the field. If you're clogging that lane, if you've got a free runner in the middle, or you got a guy who can just win quickly, and there's someone in the middle, it's harder to make those throws because you're cutting down the angles, you're closing down those windows. And so as the interior defenders, the defensive tackles, those pass rushers become more valuable, guess what? The guys who stop those guys are now also more valuable. And we saw that in this most recent free agent cycle. Guys like Robert Hunt, who is a totally fine interior offensive lineman, a totally fine guard in the NFL, get $100 million. He's not one of the 15 or 20 best guards in the league, probably. He got $100 million. Now, part of that is the tax that you pay on free agency. But part of that is that it's really, really valuable to have these guys now because of the pervasiveness of these interior pass rushers and the amount of chaos that they can wreak on your football team. I bring this up to say two things. One, the Packers have to be very, very happy that they have Elgton Jenkins under contract. Jenkins is $14.4 million on the cap this year. He's $17.6 million on the cap next year. That's a lot of money, and certainly a lot of money in a vacuum, but a lot of money to pay any football player. But given the market right now, he's one of the 5 to 8 best guards in the league, and you're not paying him at the top of the market for at least 2 more years. And then by the time you get to 2026, when he's making almost $25 million, he's still not at what the top of the market is right now. That's a really good contract. By 2026, the cap is going to balloon, and they could rework that deal. They could extend him on that deal. He is, I think, the kind of player that they would give a third contract to, assuming the next 2 years he stays healthy. I think if he stays healthy this year, at the end of this year, so this spring, this next summer, and to the next fall, not this upcoming, next, you look at an extension because they just don't have that much money tied up in these guys. Now you've got these young players who are going to come up in the next couple of years, but you're good with where Elgton Jenkins is right now. He's really good right now. And nothing is more important in this franchise than keeping Jordan Love upright. It's the same reason why the Panthers paid Robert Hunt all that money. because they needed to make sure they gave Bryce Young not optimal conditions, because it's not optimal. That roster is still an absolute trash fire. But it's better. And you're getting a better read on what he can be, who he is, what you're going to get from him in those circumstances. And so from that standpoint, you go, okay, I get it. I get why you do that. This also has draft implications, though. That's the second piece of this. You go, why do the Packers want to drafting a guard? I would never advise in a vacuum drafting a guard early. The historical data, you guys know, everydayers know, I am big on this. I am nerdy about this. History says, do not spend early round capital on interior offensive line. And the reason is, over the years, the league is really, really bad at delineating the good guys from the bad guys, or the good players from the great players. The players you're getting day 2, day 3 are not materially better on average than the players you're getting on day 1. Now that's true. But for a team like the Packers, with all of the draft capital that they have and the roster needs that they have, I still think corner in the first is what makes the most sense. But if you love one of these guys, like let's say Talisi Fuaga falls from Oregon State. Remember too, Brian Bulaga was not going to fall to the Packers right up until he fell to the Packers. You're talking about a guy who has legit top 10 kind of buzz. Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. He can be either for the Packers. But let's say they think he can be an all-pro caliber right guard. My take on where this team is right now, and where this draft is, and you can get TJ Tampa at 41, probably. I'll do it. Because as you go down the line with these interior offensive linemen, when you look at surplus value, what is a rookie worth on their rookie contract that you don't have to pay them for? So if you're getting top of the market production from a guy, what are you not paying for? Because if you had to go out in the open market and pay for that thing, how much does it cost to do that? Because you can also just do that. That value now for an interior offensive lineman, a guard especially, is creeping up there. And so now I think we're getting closer to where you can justify it, even though history says it's not a good bet to believe that you are better than the historical averages, that you are smarter than the average bear, that you can do this. I think for the Packers, they're the kind of team for whom it actually does make sense, given where they are in their development. They might be an elite right guard away from being the best offense in the league. That is not hyperbole. I'm going to say it again. They might be an elite right guard away from being the best offense in the league. And so if that's true, it's okay to allocate, and maybe not just okay, maybe it is smart even to allocate real draft resources to that position. And I think if I'm the Packers, I can justify that. Now, I am of the opinion that if one of these stud left tackles falls, draft that guy. Draft that guy. And on day 2, you have options. This is a deep interior offensive line class. On day 3, no one is better than the Packers at finding these guys on day 3. And history says that's a fine solution too. You already have a top 100 pick invested at this spot. Sean Ryan is there. And so for the Packers, this can make sense. I'm going to try and make sense of all of this through a mock draft, because it is, after all, Mock Draft Monday. We'll do that next on Locked On Packers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we're going to do a live draft because I love a live draft and because I like to walk you through the process. And sometimes I find when I do them ahead of time, I get to my explanation and people always go, well, who else is on the board? Like, I don't like that pick, but what were my options? Now, this gets really interesting because the best player on the board for me right now, and I have randomness turned way down. This is the Pro Football Focus Simulator, is Byron Murphy II. And this dovetails with something we've been talking about on this show. That if Kenny Clark is not part of your long-term plan, someone like Byron Murphy, even if you have to move up for him, makes so much sense for the Packers. Now, I think it is the case that he is not going to be here or likely not going to be here at this spot. But for sake of argument, because I do think there is a good chance that the Packers, if they like someone like Byron Murphy, would move up for him, given all of the positions that they need, which is not that many, and how valuable interior pass rushers are, right? Then this makes sense to move up for someone like this. And so I'm interested to see how this plays out if we take it this route. So I'm going to draft Byron Murphy here at 25. Johnny Newton also on the board. Jackson Powers-Johnson also on the board. Tyler Guyton also on the board. But I think this is a no-brainer here for the Packers at 25. Okay, now at 41, you have a lot of options. Tyler Nubin is here. Zach Frazier is here. TJ Tampa, my guy, is here. Mike Sanderstill, the corner, is here. Troy Franklin, Ennis Rakestraw Jr. Now, Ennis Rakestraw, I want to stop and just do a second on him because he ran in the 4.4s, mid 4.4s at his pro day, which buys into what he said is that he was hurt himself during the combine. And so if he's a 4.4 guy in the mid 180s, maybe he can be a nickel corner for the Packers. Now, the problem is, I think at 41, you want a guy who you think can play both, if you can. How many guys in this draft can do that? There aren't that many. But find a player who you think can be, at this point, both an interior and a boundary corner if you can. I'd want to flag the Rakestraw thing here because I do think he is potentially in play at 41. But you got this defensive tackle. Do you want to go offensive line here? Now, Zach Frazier is an interesting one. I think this is a little early for a center, but the Packers have had some interest in some centers and some interior offensive linemen here. I think you can find one later. So because I haven't taken him in a while, I'm just going to flag this once again. You guys know TJ Tampa is my guy. And so I think there are some nickel guys later in the draft, maybe at 58 even, that I can get. I think there are some interior offensive linemen that I can get a little bit later. So I'm going to take TJ Tampa here, defense, to start this draft. So Mike Sanderstill still on the board here. Javon Bullard still on the board here. Adisa Isaac, the pass rusher from Penn State, on the board here. Jonathan Brooks, the running back from Texas, on the board here. Kieran Amagaji from Yale on the board here. An interesting option for the Packers. Have yet to take an offensive lineman. I do think he is the kind of guy who could make sense for the Packers. Someone who could play guard or play tackle. 6'5", 318. My guy, Kyrie Jackson, still on the board here. How do you want to play this? Do you want to take a safety? I think Bullard is the perfect complement to Xavier McKinney. I've said that before. Do you want to go Sanderstill? Did he test well enough for you to go, hey, look, I know he's small, but at 58, he can be your nickel day one. I kind of like it. And so, hey, let's have some fun. I know he's small. We've talked a lot about, hey, can they go outside of their norms here? Let's do it. I think he tested well enough. And I think for someone like Jeff Hafley, who's had smaller corners before, I could see them being like, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. I think that makes some sense for Green Bay. Okay, now how do you want to finish this off? Running back, offensive line. There's some guys I really, really like here. Trey Benson, who I feel like I've taken him in every single mock that I could possibly take him. And so that's suboptimal. I'm going to take someone that I think the Packers would have interest in. He is an athletic marvel. Patrick Paul, the tackle from Houston. I think he can actually play tackle. He's at this point, you're fine in the third round, like 88. You're fine if he's just your swing tackle. But maybe he profiles as someone who can be there long-term for you. I love this pick. Not someone I've picked before for the Packers. And we're having a conversation tomorrow with Jason Hirschhorn about quarterbacks. I do wonder if the Packers would Michael Pratt from Tulane here. I know this is early, but if they see this as just like, let's take a flyer on a guy who we think can be really good as a backup, a high-level backup, what that could do for the Packers. But that's an interesting one. But I think we've gone too far without taking an interior offensive lineman. We've got Christian Mahogany here, Mason McCormick. These end up being the guys that we always sit here and look at. I'm gonna reach a little bit because I know this is a name that Packer fans have had their eye on. Bo Limmer, the center from Arkansas. He tested like an absolute crazy person. And so let's just have this. We're having fun. I'm on vacation. It's a working vacation. I'm still here, of course. So let's just have some fun. Let's take this. This mock has gone absolutely off the rails, but I love it. And I promise you, you will not see this mock or anything even approximating this mock anywhere else on the internet. That's part of what we do here on Locked On Packers. All right, back tomorrow. America's guest, Jason Hirschhorn, is going to be with us. We're going to do a What's Next this week for Matt LaFleur. My conversation with Matt Ryan from the Super Bowl, who played under Kyle Shanahan, who coached under or played under Matt LaFleur. I'm going to get it right one of these times. And I had a really nice conversation with in Vegas at the Super Bowl. So that's coming up this week as well. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast. iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. Come hang out with us on our socials. Locked On Packers on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on TikTok, all the places so you can stay Locked On Packers.